3 days had passed since Carl first found out about the strange activities at Foxy's pond. According to Tommy, Carl's best friend, a group of older kids had taken to performing peculiar rituals that involved dunking each other under the smelly water. Tommy told him that when they re-emerged, they had special powers. Magic powers. Carl didn't believe him at first, but Tommy swore that it was true. His own brother, he said, was one of the older kids. Tommy explained that they had found a book of magic spells written in a peculiar language, and that's what they used to perform their ceremonies. They're probably just getting drunk down there, Carl pointed out. It's not magic, it's alcohol. I'm telling you, man, I've seen Charlie drunk plenty of times. When he comes back from Foxy's pond, he's different. It's like he can read my thoughts. Anyone can read your thoughts. All you think about is food. Tommy was a fat kid, and he didn't argue. This is different. You'll see. When we camp out in my garden at the weekend, we can sneak down and have a look. Carl was dubious, but he was excited too. He liked nothing more than going on expeditions in the middle of the night with Tommy. Their parents assumed that they just told each other ghost stories before going to sleep in the tent. They had no idea that Tommy set an alarm to wake them up just after midnight so they could wander the streets, looking for anything that might be interesting. Sometimes the boys would stay awake all night so that they could steal the bottles of fresh orange juice and chocolate milk left on the doorsteps of the houses in the neighbourhood. Not that night. That night, they would look for magic. The night air was chilly, despite it being the middle of August. Carl shivered as he crawled out of the tent. All of the lights in Tommy's house were off. Carl knew that Tommy's parents would be fast asleep. They never stayed up late. Not even at the weekend. "Oh, it's freezing, Tommy," he said. "Let's just get back in our sleeping bags. We can set the alarm for 5 o'clock and grab some juice from Mrs. Henderson's." "You're joking, right?" Tommy was halfway out of the tent and clearly wasn't keen on that plan. "No, I'm not joking. I don't even have a jacket." Tommy's face lit up and he crawled backwards into the tent. A moment later he was back, a huge grin spread across his face. "Here, I brought a spare." Carl took one of the jackets from Tommy and slipped it over his shoulders. It was huge, almost hanging down to his knees. Tommy pointed at him with his left hand. His right hand was planted on his mouth while he let out an exaggerated laugh. "What are you laughing for?" Carl snapped. "I'm normal size. It's your jacket that's stupidly massive." "Shh, it'll wake my dad." "All right. So if I talk, I'll wake people, but your stupid howling is okay?" Tommy shrugged. "Come on, let's get a move on." The boys left Tommy's garden by climbing over the wall. Carl had to help Tommy get over it, but despite the extra effort, it was still a better route than going through the rusty gate. It was in desperate need of a good oiling, and its awful screech could have woken the entire street. Foxy's pond wasn't too far away. All they had to do was walk along the old railway lines and they'd be there in less than 20 minutes. There was no chance of encountering a train on the way. The lines were almost completely out of use. A few times a year, the local railway museum charged people to ride along the tracks on an old steam engine, but never in the middle of the night. "Why do they call it Foxy's Pond?" Tommy asked. "No idea. I suppose it belongs to some bloke called Foxy." "Maybe it's a woman." Tommy's face brightened again. "A woman so sexy that everyone just calls her Foxy." "It's possible. Do you think we'll see her there? Maybe she'll want to do it with us." "Do what?" "You know, the business." "Maybe," Carl laughed. He felt sorry for his friend. Even if there was a sexy woman called Foxy down there waiting for potential lovers, he doubted she'd be willing to settle for a hugely overweight 14-year-old. Although he rated his own chances slightly higher, but he figured it was best to keep quiet about that. "How many people will be there with your brother?" "Dunno, 5 maybe. It'll just be him and his mates." Carl didn't like Tommy's brother, or his friends. The prospect of meeting them at the pond wasn't a good one. "Don't worry about them though," Tommy said. He must have sensed Carl's thoughts. "We'll just hide in the bushes and see what they get up to." The area was pitch black. There weren't any streetlights around the track, only bushes and open fields. Luckily, the moon was out, lighting the way. The boys joked as they walked. Tommy was still dreaming of bumping into Foxy, the gorgeous woodland babe. He reckoned she'd probably just give him a blowjob, rather than lying down in the dirt to do it. They both knew that neither scenario was particularly likely, but it passed the time as they strolled along. Foxy's pond lay at the bottom of a steep hill, just to the side of the railway tracks, hidden from view by a small wooded area. From the top of the hill, Carl could see all of the surrounding countryside swathed in darkness. Occasional dense patches of bright lights marked out the towns and villages that nestled on the rolling hills. Everything seemed calm and beautiful from that distance. Despite the dark in the distance, Carl noticed that smoke was rising from the area around the pond, and an occasional flicker of light could be seen through the tiniest gaps in the foliage. Tommy saw it too. "They've already lit the fire," he said. "Come on, we're going to miss it." They both started jogging to get closer to the trees around the pond. It didn't take long before Tommy began to flag and his breaths became increasingly heavy. "Hurry, Tommy, this was your idea." Tommy stopped and rested his hands on his knees. "Go on without me. I can't make it." "Don't be stupid," Carl said. "We've only jogged about 30 meters. Just give it a minute and we can walk the rest of the way." Carl took a moment to look around while Tommy recovered. They had left the railway tracks and were now on a simple dirt path that led directly through the trees. From there they could conceal themselves in the bushes, a perfect vantage point to spy on the magical activity around Foxy's pond. "Right, I'm ready," Tommy said, although his face was still red and he hadn't quite managed to calm his breathing. They walked along the path carefully. The smell from the fire was obvious, and they wanted to cause as little noise as possible now that they were getting close. They reached the trees and left the path. This would be the trickiest part. Leaves and twigs littered the ground, and any wrong move could alert the gathering around the pond. Fortunately, there seemed to be a lot of laughing coming from Tommy's brother and his friends. Carl hoped that it would be enough to drown out any mishaps they might have in the bushes. Tommy was a dependable guy. If you needed someone to trip on a log or stumble into a bush, then he was definitely your man. Barely a moment passed when he wasn't whinging about thorns scratching his legs or spider webs covering his face. "Shut up, Tommy!" Carl hissed at him. "Do you want Charlie and his mates to find us or something? You're stomping about like a bloody buffalo. Just pack it in. Follow me and step where I step. You don't have to be cross. You're a proper baby. Let's see this magic and then we can get some juice." Carl had had enough. He was close to leaving Tommy behind and going back to the tent. He felt as though he always had to help Tommy out, as though he was incapable of doing anything without assistance. But he was his best friend, and Carl knew that he could rely on him if he needed to. It was just annoying to always be the one giving help rather than receiving it. Tommy didn't cause any more problems after Carl's outburst, and they soon found themselves in the perfect spot. They took up positions, lying on their bellies and watching the bizarre events around the pond. Tommy's brother and another kid sat beside a campfire, both wearing only shorts. 2 more people were in chest-deep water in the pond, and another stood with a book, chanting foreign words that Carl had never heard before. The boy with the book raised his hand and then dropped it suddenly. "Karalam!" he screeched, and the 2 boys in the pond ducked their heads under the water. They stayed under for about 10 seconds before they shot back above the surface, bellowing with delight. Carl couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was clear that they were excited. One of them dashed for dry land and started shouting when he reached it. He was flexing his muscles and jumping up and down. The other boy remained in the water, looking thoughtful. "They're just idiots," Carl whispered to Tommy. "All they're doing is clowning around." "Shh, let's keep watching." Tommy's brother got up from his seat by the fire. Carl noticed that he wasn't wearing shorts at all. He was in his underpants. "Do the Charlie special for me," Tommy's brother shouted to the boy with the book as he waded into the water. The boy flicked through a few pages and started to read. His low voice carried easily through the still air. "Cum kalara, igut kalara, Good car, Kalara. He raised his arm again and screeched, Karalam! As he dropped it. Charlie vanished beneath the water. The other boy in the pond grinned. A few moments passed and Charlie reappeared, his arms stretched above him. He looked as though he was about to shout when he twitched suddenly and stared directly at Carl and Tommy's hiding place. Who's there? He called. Carl felt like he was going to wet his pants. They'd been discovered, but how? It was way too dark for Charlie to be able to see them amongst the vegetation. A sly smile spread across Charlie's face. I can hear you, piggy boy, he said. Shit! Tommy got up suddenly and made to run back to the track. Carl couldn't believe it. The moron had completely given away their position. Charlie let out a triumphant whoop and ran towards the hiding place. The other boys followed. The one who had been jumping about and flexing his muscles was the fastest by far. He overtook Charlie and was rapidly closing the gap. Tommy disappeared into the trees. No point running, Carl thought. He stood up and waved down to the approaching boys. All right, Charlie? It didn't take long before Charlie and his friends reached him. They formed a circle around Carl, all of them dripping wet and reeking of pond water. Well, well, Charlie said, if it isn't Piggy Boy's little girlfriend. I don't remember inviting you. Charlie was nothing like his brother. He was tall and powerfully built, even for a 17-year-old. The other boys with him were equally large, and Carl didn't recognize any of them. Their stares were unmistakable, though. Carl knew he had to think fast if he wanted to avoid a beating. Tommy said you were hanging around down here, so we thought we'd come and join you. You mean you weren't making love in the bushes? Look, he's even wearing Piggy's clothes. How sweet, Charlie said, making the others laugh. Carl chose to ignore that. How did you know we were here? Well, at least Piggy hasn't given away all our secrets, but I'll tell you anyway. I can read your mind, Carl, and Tommy's. Everyone's thoughts are in my head. You're scared like a little girl. What do you think we're going to do? No, wait, don't tell me. You think we're going to fill you in. He was right. Although Carl didn't think that the knowledge came from any special ability, his fear must have been plastered all over his face. Charlie turned to the right. Come out, Tommy. Even if I couldn't read your mind, your whimpering alone tells me you're in those trees. Tommy emerged from his hiding place, his head hanging low. I'm sorry, Charlie. I just wanted to see the magic. He had tears on his bloated cheeks. Oh, you'll see some magic. Don't worry about that, Charlie told him. He turned back to the other boys. Grab Loverboy and hold him still. The boys rushed at Carl and held him secure. He didn't resist. The smell of the pond water was sickening, and he tried his best to breathe through his mouth to avoid gagging. Charlie went for Tommy and swung a powerful blow at his head. Tommy staggered, but his bulk saved him from toppling to the ground. He clutched his hands to his face and cried. Come on, Charlie, you don't have to do that, Carl said. We're not doing anything. Oh, but I do have to. Piggy Boy needs to learn his lesson. Don't you, Tommy? No, please, Tommy whimpered and dropped to his knees. Please, Charlie, I didn't mean to ruin your... A swift kick to the gut cut him off. The air blasted from Tommy's lungs and he collapsed forward onto the ground. Carl struggled to get loose, but the boys held him tight. They were all laughing. Leave him alone, he hasn't done anything to you. Hasn't he? He's a little shit, and now he's going to pay. He kicked him again and again, focusing on Tommy's legs. Each blow brought a cry of anguish. Charlie suddenly turned to look at Carl, venom in his gaze. He completely lost control. You want to save your boyfriend, don't you? He laughed. He's not my boyfriend. Just let us go and we'll leave. One of the other boys spoke for the first time. It's too late for that. You'll have to be initiated into the club. Can't have you babbling about the book. I don't want to join your gay club. Carl snapped at him. I just want to get some chocolate milk and go home. Gay? Charlie was outraged. You are the gay ones. Wait till I tell everyone that we caught you sucking each other off down in the bushes of Foxy's pond. I'll even tell Dad. This last bit was aimed at Tommy, who was still crying on the grass. No, Tommy managed between sobs. Don't do that. Let him say what he likes, Carl said. We're not the ones parading around in our underwear and rubbing pond scum on each other. I like this kid, Charlie smiled. Maybe you can be in the club. He spun around and stamped hard onto Tommy's left leg. Carl thought he heard a snap, and judging by Tommy's high-pitched scream, he knew that the leg was broken. "Fuck! You've done it now, Charlie," the boy with the book said. "How are we going to explain this?" "What? He fell, didn't you, piggy?" Tommy was clearly in agony. His squealing made him more pig-like than ever. "I said, didn't you, piggy?" "Yes, I fell." He writhed on the floor. I fell. I'm fat and clumsy and I fell." "See? Everything's fine." Charlie gestured towards the fire. "Let's take our new member down for the initiation ceremony." Carl swallowed, despite his dry mouth. There was nothing he could do to help Tommy, and he didn't want to be on the receiving end of Charlie's rage, so he went with the boys to the edge of the pond. They left Tommy behind on the grass without a second glance. "I'll come back for you, Tommy," Carl thought. "I'll take you to a hospital." "Forget about Piggy Boy," Charlie hissed. "He's on his own. Let's talk about your initiation. We've been thinking about trying a new spell, but the book says it's dangerous. It doesn't say why, but it recommends that it shouldn't be tried. Something about making the subject uncontrollably ravenous. Sounds interesting, eh?" "Not to me," Carl told him. "Everyone has their own power. Mine is mind reading, so I already know you're going to go through with the ritual. Anything to save your bosom buddy Piggy, isn't that right?" It was right. If going into the pond would help Tommy, then Carl was prepared to do it. He didn't believe that the boys gained any power from their stupid book. It seemed like all it did was turn them into arseholes. And they probably managed that without magic. The boy with the book looked apprehensive. "I don't know about this," he said. "The book says never to do it. It's the most powerful spell. It might never wear off." "Bollocks to that," Charlie said. "Carl doesn't mind being hungry forever, do you? Anyway, he doesn't even believe that it'll work. Maybe he can read my mind." Charlie told Carl to get himself ready by taking his clothes off, unless he didn't mind them getting drenched. As Carl undressed, Charlie and his friends huddled together and spoke in hushed voices. Carl looked back at Tommy. He was still lying on the ground and crying, but he was watching the events with intense interest. "I don't give a shit about that," Charlie shouted suddenly. "I want to see what happens." Carl swallowed again and started walking into the water. It was freezing, and he began to shiver uncontrollably as his feet sunk into the stinking mud. "You'll have to go deeper than that," one of the boys said. "You have to put your whole body under the water." "It's cold." "Just fucking get in there." Charlie seemed close to losing control again, so Carl waded further in. He stopped when the icy water was up to his shoulders. "Hurry up then, I'll get pneumonia if you don't read your stupid words." The boy with the book looked nervous and licked his lips as he positioned himself on the pond's edge. The others moved away beyond the fire. He flicked through the pages and looked at his companions for reassurance. After an encouraging hand gesture from Charlie, he began to read the strange words on the page. "Upsilaka, cum kalara, igut upsilaka, igut kala upsila, ka kala upsila." He raised his right arm. "Karalam!" His right arm dropped, and Carl submerged himself in the foul water. As he held his breath, Carl was overcome with a sudden euphoria. Everything became clear to him. Powerful surges of pure joy flowed through his entire body. He felt as though he was the real Carl for the first time in his life, as though he had been merely a shell of a person throughout his first 14 years on the planet. Everything was better now, and he knew what he had to do. He broke the surface in a whoosh, and heard himself shout as though from a great distance. The boy with the book stumbled backwards in shock and ran away. He heard Charlie's voice, distant but distinct. "Fucking hell! His eyes are glowing!" Carl looked around as if taking in the world for the first time. He was hungry like never before. Charlie and his friends were running away, up towards the railway tracks. They left their clothes behind by the dwindling flames of the campfire. A thought suddenly occurred to Carl. Yes, there is another. He spun and saw Tommy lying in terrified agony on the grass. Carl rushed out of the water and advanced on him, salivating. "It's time for you to help me for a change. Time for you to give me your delicious flesh." He barely heard Tommy scream as he sank his teeth into the rolls of fat.